Blessed be the name of the Lord. In one of his letters, in 1 Corinthians, Paul wrote that women should be silent in churches. These are controversial verses, and many pastors don't want to touch them with a 10-foot pole. And many churches don't like it, and women don't like those verses often, and I am not surprised. It's kind of strange that Paul would write this, because in other places in the Bible it says that we are all equal under Jesus Christ. We are all partakers in his blessings and salvation, and there's no more female or male or slave or free. So why would Paul write that? Because of verses like this, he's often accused of being a misogynist, and I tell you, Paul didn't hate women. Good treatment of women comes from Christianity. Women in Christian countries, because of Jesus Christ, have been treated well and as equals, unlike in other parts of the world. So why would Paul write that women should be silent in church? And this is not about teaching, because yes, Eve was deceived first, and that's why women should not teach men. But this is about women just being quiet, silent in church. Well, now these days people come to church and they just sit in the pews and nobody's saying anything. There's no prophesying, there's no speaking in tongues in most churches. So everybody is silent either way, except for the pastor. There is a part of biblical studies of theology called exegesis. It deals with historical background and historical conditions of a place at the time when the text was written. Exegesis tries to study how people who lived back then, back there, how they understood the verses that we're studying. How did they see it? How did they receive those verses? It's not easy to go back in time, of course, but we could go to those places. We could go to the places where the Bible was written to help us understand the mentality of the people of those lands and their culture. The Bible is a Jewish book written by Jews, through the Jews, for the Jews, to the Jew first, right? We went to Israel twice, and one of those times we got invited to a Messianic congregation. It was Jewish people who believe in Jesus. Many of them were American. They moved to Israel from the States. And I don't want to say the name of the congregation because I don't want to make them look bad. But it was in Galilee, Hagalil. The service was kind of like a regular evangelical service. They had announcements and a sermon and worship. The worship was in Hebrew, but the sermon and announcements, everything else was in English. And then towards the end, they moved to the time of prayer and prophesying. It was kind of free time when anybody could step up and pray loudly, and people would have a prophecy, and some people would just want to speak praises to God. People would stand up, start praying, but then gradually it just became about women. It was the women who would come up to the front further, and they would start speaking louder and longer. And the men quietly, gradually started stepping back. I think they knew what was going on. They went through that before, and they just proceeded with a well-planned retreat. They went to the back, they sat down, and at first they kept praying with the women a little bit, but then they just started kind of hanging around and chatting and just waiting until the women were done. And the women took their sweet time, I tell you. One could pray and shout praises to God for 5 minutes, or say something, prophesy something that could have been said in 30 seconds. And another one would be waiting to cut in and take over and continue, and sometimes they would be speaking one over the other, and it was getting louder and longer, and It was, "Oh Lord, we praise you for the good deeds. Oh Lord, yes, we give you glory. And I have a word for Israel," and so forth. And it was all nice and good. And of course, I don't mean to criticize prayer and prophesying, but it went on for too long, for I think about 40 minutes. And the man waited at the back, while women enjoyed their time of being the principal, primary speakers, enjoying being the center of the church, the center of attention, prophesying and shouting and praying. Now, all of this was in a home church. This was in somebody's house. It was maybe about 40 people, but in the end, the whole service lasted close to 2 hours. Some people went to the kitchen, while some women took the center of the stage, and frankly, it was a lot of unnecessary yapping. And right there and right then, I understood what Paul meant by saying that women should be silent in church. Jewish women are wonderful, but they love talking. And I totally agree with Paul when he said that women should be silent in churches, at least when it comes to churches in the Middle East. And remember that the Bible tells us, God says, do not pray with so many words. Jesus said that himself. You don't have to use many words in hope that God will hear you. But in that Middle Eastern church, Israeli Messianic church, there were too many empty phrases heaped up around. We don't have that problem here. Like I said, most of the time everybody is silent in church anyways. But in the Middle East, things can get a little lively, and it's great. But things can get out of hand. They can take too long, they can get too loud. And that's why Paul finishes those thoughts in 1 Corinthians 14, saying that all things should be done decently and in order. And those verses are often used against even the slightest move of the Spirit in Western church. But that's not right. This is said in the context of Middle Eastern churches, where they really needed that exhortation to do things orderly, and for the women not to monopolize the time and just be the only ones who keep talking, and the men couldn't even get a word edgewise. So I totally agree with Paul that women should be silent in church. Thank you for listening. May the Lord richly bless you from Zion. Take care. Bye-bye. You can support this ministry now by purchasing shirts with the slogans "Make Church Great Again," "Make Faith Great Again," and "Make Christianity Great Again." Thank you so much.